Barry Grint, a mastering engineer since 1984. Barry founded Alchemy in 1998, having previously worked at Abbey Road, Porky's Mastering, Tape One, and the legendary Trident Studios. Barry has worked with many award-winning artists include George Ezra's double platinum Staying at Tamara's, the platinum single Shotgun, Tom O'Dale Wrong Crowd, and twice Brit-nominated Tom Walker, What a Time to Be Alive. Classic projects include Madonna, Prince, Oasis, Bon Jovi, David Bowie, The Rolling Stones, The Beatles, and Paul McCartney. So, first question. How mastering came about, and how did you get into mastering?
Mastering was originally just a transfer service.
Mm-hmm.
So once records started being mass-produced, there was the need to take what had been recorded in the studio and to put it onto a format where they could manufacture from. So it was literally men in white coats sitting there, getting a recording, and then transferring it onto a lacquer or shellac or wax for the process to then go off to a factory to be manufactured. And then mastering evolved into more of a creative process where the engineers, rather than having a basic control desk with just the functionality needed to cut a lacquer, it started having equipment that was more traditional in recording studios, such as equalizers and compressors. And then I think probably during the early 70s, that's when it really became something that contributed artistically to the whole process. And for me, I started at Trident Studios as a runner, and the progression there would normally be that you would become an assistant engineer or a tape op, and then work your way up to become an engineer in the studio. But I decided that although I thought that was what I wanted to do when I joined, I didn't feel that it actually suited my temperament. And it just so happened that the studio also had a mastering service, which I hadn't known existed up until working at the studio. I went there, saw what was involved, felt that suited me better, and so instead of going into the studio side of things, I went into mastering.
To you, what type of skills is essential for a good mastering engineer?
It sounds quite obvious, but a really good set of ears.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that's not just in the case of having perfect hearing. It's having an ear for music. A lot of mastering engineers have, to some degree, played a musical instrument. And so, you know, it's about being able to have a feel for how something should sound, rather than just, you know, an analytical, scientific, I've got perfect hearing, you know, that sort of thing. It's much more of an emotional involvement.
Do you need a mastering studio to master? Or in this case, could aspiring artists master in the comfort of their own home?
Yeah, I think that, yes, that's entirely possible. I think that part of the problem, I had a job coming recently, and I'd made some changes as I would do normally, and it was something that was entirely done by the artists themselves, although it was being released through a label. And the comment came back from the artist of, why is this sound changed? Mastering just makes things louder. And I think that there is a danger that people will perceive that is all that mastering is. And that isn't right. Mastering can be just that. If somebody's done a fantastic mix, then you're not going to change it just in order to prove a point or score brownie points or whatever. You will do the minimum to it. But those mixes are few and far between. And if somebody is working in their bedroom, they're not going to have great monitoring. They're not going to have acoustic treatment. So they're not really going to know if there is a defect in what they're doing. And so that's where you do need a mastering engineer and a mastering room to sit there and go, right, okay, I am now listening on a professional setup in a professional environment, and you're not hearing what's going on in the low frequencies, which is why there may be a problem. Or you're not aware of the fact that there's a dip in your monitoring where the crossover point is. To just say that all mastering does is make things louder is really quite a ridiculous thing to say.
How do you approach and prevent ear fatigue?
It's quite easy when you're working on a track that requires a lot of work or some detailed work to find that the monitoring creeps up in volume, getting a little bit louder the longer that you work on it. And I think that's where a cup of tea comes in, and you have to just go, okay, this is actually louder than I would normally listen, so I'm going to stop, and I'm going to go and make a cup of tea, and then I'm going to come back in, turn the monitoring down a little bit, and then listen to how it sounds, and then make a judgment, having had a moment or two not focusing on the music. And then when I'm cutting records, there's no requirement to be listening at a great volume when you're cutting a record, because nowadays all of the work has been done before you make a start. You need to listen loud enough to be able to hear if something goes wrong, but also the actual cut ahead, if when it was cutting, if it wasn't cutting music, if it was just cutting a silent groove, if you got close enough to the cut ahead and shouted, that would be picked up and would be cut into the groove. You're monitoring at a loud volume while you're trying to cut, you'll actually get a certain amount of smearing of the sound. So by just monitoring at a lowish level, you'll actually end up with a cut that sounds a lot cleaner.
How has the role of the master engineer changed throughout the years?
It was just a technical service at the outset, and has become something that is more creative. But now the danger isn't artificial intelligence mastering. It's actually people not understanding what mastering is and just thinking we're some human volume control.
What do you think about AI mastering?
If you send a track to a mastering engineer, he will master it, send it back. And if you then sent him his master, then he'd go, oh, actually, this sounds okay. I don't need to do anything with this. If you send something through and have it done with AI, and then you send the result, you send that back in to be mastered, they'll master it again. And they'll master and master and master. There's no, actually, this sounds okay, it doesn't require me to do anything in that loop.
So, what are the differences in mastering for streaming services and vinyl, such as Spotify, YouTube?
Ben touched on it earlier.
Yeah.
It's that in an ideal world, you would be creating mastered audio for the relevant release format. But nobody's going to pay for that to happen. And it's not all just a question of turning the volume up or down. I think for For CD and for streaming, yes, you could say, okay, well, for the CD it's going to be loud, and then for the streaming we'll make it work for LUFS. For vinyl, though, you would probably want to be reviewing all of the tracks to see whether you want to back off individual compression or limiting on individual tracks, rather than just looking at some kind of master limiter that you'd be backing off.
What are the challenges in finding a career as a mastering engineer?
It's much the same as wanting to do anything that's studio related, and it's just trying to get in through the door. There are very few openings each year, and it's always been the case. It wasn't something that was easy when I was starting out. You just have to keep plugging away and hope that the moment there's a vacancy, you're the first person through the door to take the opportunity. There is a question that you had that I was just looking at about whether artists should do their own mastering. And I think that I can understand why people will try to get into mastering by offering mastering at home. The problem for us who have, a building, equipment, bills to pay, is that a lot of people aren't clear what mastering is and don't understand what the difference might be. So from a commercial perspective, people mastering at home, undercutting me, isn't good for my business, but I can understand why they do it. And equally, we have to charge an amount because of the overheads that we have, and not everybody can afford that. So if somebody is trying to release music, they're paying for it all themselves, they don't have a lot of money, and AI or somebody who can do something for them using a package on a computer in their bedroom, you've got to do what you've got to do. I'm realistic about that, providing that everybody understands why we're all in our particular places in the marketplace.